when you start Visual CUT, this is what you see. There are three main tabs. You can select reports and open them. You can preview them in Preview tab, and then you can set all the processing options in the Export Email tab. Let's review what we can do in the Select Reports tab. The first thing you would probably do under the Select Reports tab is click on the Open Folder button and select some reports to load into the grid. And this grid is just a convenience for you to get access to previously opened reports and see settings for them. You can customize what you see for each one of these rows. You can add categories or select previously specified categories for subject and type. And you can see when was the last time that the report ran. You can reorganize the sequence of the columns. You can sort by any of these column headers. And you can group by them. And that can be done in multiple levels. For example, type within path. You can change your mind at any point. Typically, when you group on something, you may want to turn off the visibility for that column, and you can do this in this dialog by just right-clicking the column headers, and you can also decrease or increase the font size. I'm going to turn off the path column. I can still see the path information in the group header for the path. Other things that you can do in this grid, you can remove a certain row from the grid. Of course, when you do that, it doesn't actually delete the report file, it just removes it from the grid. And sometimes you need to move reports from one location to another, or maybe from a mapped drive location to UNC naming, and you can do that by right-clicking and select the option of Copy RPT and Settings. Not only will the RPT file will be copied, but all the settings that were specified in the Export Email tab and were stored in the internal visualcut.mdb database will be copied as well. Let's review now what you can do with the buttons that you see under the Select Reports tab. We've already seen that the Open Folder button allows you to open reports into Visual CUT. Let's assume that you open such a report and you're previewing and setting some options for it. If at the same time you want to make some changes to the report design in Crystal, and you saved that RPT file from Crystal, you need to reload the report by either closing Visual CUT, starting it again, or you can use this button to reload the latest version of the RPT file into Visual CUT so you can see the effect of the changes of the design in Crystal. The User Manual button opens up the User Manual in Microsoft Word. The User Manual is well over 100 pages long, so you may want to use the table of contents to navigate and find information that you need. The Version Information button allows you to see what version you're currently running, and this button allows you to also check for updates and apply patches without needing to remove and reinstall Visual CUT. So that starts the Visual CUT Update Wizard. The Exit button obviously exits from Visual CUT. The most complex button is the Option, this colorful cube button. And when you start that, you get 4 tabs. So let's review what each one of these tabs allows you to do. Under the Process tab, you probably want to have this option turned on so that PDF exports include some extra properties. The second option is useful only in cases where you're calling Visual CUT from another application, maybe an ASP.NET application or PHP, JSP, and you want Visual CUT to signal back to the calling application when processing is ended and whether or not it was successful. As you start using Visual CUT, if you open a report and it is not set up to allow bursting, Visual CUT gives you a very detailed message that tells you what you need to do in order to prepare this report for bursting. This basically boils down to placing what you're grouping on at level 1 in group header or group footer level 1. This option, using saved data in scheduled reports, is useful only in cases where you have RPT files that use data from perhaps a data source that is not available to Visual CUT, maybe a Crystal Enterprise universe. In such cases, you could schedule reports to run in Crystal Enterprise, export to an RPT file format, which means you get a report with saved data, and then you can use that report with saved data in Visual CUT by turning this option on. As you open reports and save them in Visual CUT, the login information is stored encrypted for scheduled processing, for command line processing. But what if your user is sick and tired of opening reports in Visual CUT and authenticating again and again during interactive processing? Well, this option, if you turn it on, allows you to store the login information internally, encrypted, so that the user doesn't have to repeatedly log in again and again. If you turn this option on, the next time the user runs a report, they would see a Remember Me checkbox in the login dialog, and by turning on that option, they avoid the repeated login. Under the Log Alert tab, it is a good idea to put in an email address so that you get notified when a failure occurs, and keep the Silent Unattended Failure option turned on so that when scheduled processing encounters a problem, it gets silently logged to a failure.log file in the application folder and processing continues. The other options are described in the user manual. For example, these deal with detailed logging of everything that Visual CUT does directly to a table in your database. It is safe to ignore the options you find under the Parameters tab, but under the Email tab, be sure to provide not only the SMTP server address, but also a user ID and password. This way, Visual CUT can authenticate to the SMTP server, and emails going outside your domain are allowed. There are also instructions here about exempting visualcut.exe from typical blocks that McAfee or similar software may impose. Let's open up this sample report in Crystal first and see how it was designed to enable various options within Visual CUT. Here's a sample report opened in Crystal. Fields and formulas that are placed in the report header or the report footer become available to you within Visual CUT to drag and drop into various options, such as the export file name, email to, and so on. The same applies to group header level 1 and group footer level 1 fields and formulas, provided that the report is enabled for bursting. And in order to enable bursting, all you need to do is take whatever you're grouping on at level 1. In this case, it's the product type name, and you need to place that field or formula in group level 1 header or footer. And this applies even if the fields or formulas are suppressed, or even if the section is suppressed. Visual CUT would still recognize them. In our case, we're going to burst this report later on by product type, and we'll email each product type value as a separate email and a separate export. To do that, I created a little formula called email to, and because we don't really have in the sample database, we don't really have different email addresses or different managers for each product type, I just created a static formula that returns edo@milletsoftware.com for all of these group values. So when we open this report, we should see that A, we can burst this report, and B, all of these formulas, grand total, nice date, year parameter, to email, product type name, all of these formulas will become available to us, and a few more within Visual CUT. Let's open this sample report now in Visual CUT. I'm going to elect to refresh the data, set the parameter to 2004, and here's the report. Notice that we have 8 group level 1 values, 8 different product type names. And indeed, when I go to export email, Visual CUT very quickly detected that the report is grouped at level 1 by product type name, and that there are 8 group values. The formulas and fields that we placed in the report header, report footer, group level 1 header, group level 1 footer are available to me here for drag and drop into various options on the left hand side. So for example, I can see that the 2 email address that we set up before indeed returns edo@milletsoftware.com, that the grand total returns a certain value, that the group 1 header formula returns for competition, it returns the competition text plus the total for competition. For mountain, it would return a different value. Visual CUT also gives you a set of date constants that return the day number, the day name, and the month and the year, and those become useful when you need to timestamp the export file name or you want to include that information in the email message. So let's start with something simple. I'm just going to export to PDF. I'm going to specify an export file name of just sales in and that's PDF. And I'm going to drag just before the .pdf the parameter value. So when I drag and drop it in there, I get text that is a mixture of static values and a reference to one of these fields or formulas. If I move my cursor over it, it's going to resolve to the dynamic value. So when I export this report in Visual CUT, it will say sales in 2004.pdf. So this is a simple example of including dynamic values inside the various options in Visual CUT. I'm going to click Save. When I do that, then first, all the parameter values for this report are now saved in visualcut.mdb for this particular report. And when I say for this particular report, I mean the combination of the path and RPT file. And you can see that path and RPT file here. This is the file that we opened. The other thing that occurs is if there's any login information, it's also stored in the visualcut.mdb database for this particular report, and it's stored encrypted. Also, all the processing options, and in this case we have fairly limited processing options. All we said is that we want to export to Adobe Acrobat, and this is the file name. Those options are also stored in the visualcut.mdb. And by storing all of these options, I can later on call Visual CUT and request processing of this report using this command line, and the whole thing would occur. So I'm going to click Save, and I could invoke processing interactively. I'm going to do this now. I'm going to click the Start Process button. And that's it. The report has been exported to a PDF file. You can see that some bookmarks were added, and that's thanks to some formulas that I added to the report. And we can look at those later on. So now let's open this PDF and see what it looks like. So here's the exported PDF. When I open it in Adobe Acrobat, I can see that it has some color coding as well as some advanced text control over the bookmarks. Let's see how I control these things through formulas in Crystal. So here we are back in Crystal, and here are the formulas that control the bookmarks. They're always called VC_PDF_bookmark and then a number indicating the level. So at level 1 it would end up with 1, at level 2 it needs to end up with 2. And the expressions are quite simple. If I go to edit the formula, you can see that it simply returns the text of the label and then 2 colons and the page number. And I start with an expression that says if it's in a repeated group header, then return nothing, because I don't want to create bookmarks in continuations of group headers, just the first time that the group header starts for each group value. At level 2, I have a somewhat more complex logic, and here I control not only the text but also the color. So I'm saying that if it takes too many days to ship, more than 5 days to ship that product, then I want to return an exclamation point and color the bookmark red, and then include the product name plus the usual 2 colons and the page number. If the average is less than 3 days, then that's pretty fast shipping, and I want to color code the bookmark green. Otherwise, I want to color it blue. And in each case, I also include some mark for how good the performance is using also text, not just color, for the colorblind among us. So that allows me to have much stronger control, much fuller control over how the bookmarks look in the exported PDF files, and managers really like that. Back in Visual CUT, let's burst this report now. And we're going to customize the export file name. So I'm going to say sales for and drag the product type name. So now it says sales for competition in 2004, and for hybrid it's going to say sales for hybrid. If I run the process, I should now get a separate PDF file for each one of these product type names. And let's have a look at the temp folder, and there they are. If I double click to open the gloves, I should see information just for gloves. And as you can see, here's the PDF, and it contains information just for gloves. Another thing I can do is control dynamically the folders that the export goes into. And I can even create on the fly dynamic folders. So in this case, I just added the folder based on the product type name. And if I start this process, not only the exports will occur for each product type name, but a different folder would be created. And I can see that now in the temp folder, a different folder was created. And if I go to the gloves, I see the separate PDF for gloves. Let's assume that we want to email each one of these PDF files to a separate person. I'm going to turn on the option to email for each group level 1. In the from email, I'm going to paste my email address. In the email to, I'm going to drag and drop the to email formula, which in our case always resolves to edo@milletsoftware.com. But in real life, it's going to be a separate manager, a separate customer if you're invoicing customers or what have you. You also have the option to specify reply to, copy to, and even blind copy to. The SMTP server option typically should be left blank because you already specified an SMTP server address in the options dialog. So here you would specify it only if you need to override the default. In the attachment, I'm going to simply copy export file name. And in the subject, I'm going to say something like sales for, drag the product type name in there, in the year parameter. And the message could be something like, hi. And in real life, you may drag and drop some names or salutations that you placed in the group header or the group footer in the report so you have access to them. Here's your sales report for, and I can drag the product type name in there. So you can see I can build up a dynamic message to my heart's content. You could even format this message as HTML so you can have full control over what it looks like. And I'll finish. Okay, so we have the information for the email now, and I can start the process. And in my case, I'm going to point this exporting and emailing to a local SMTP server that I'm running on my own machine, so we can see the effect by looking at the outgoing folder for that emailed server. So I'm going to start the process. At this point, there's a slight delay when it establishes communication with the email server, and then it speeds up once the communication is established. So you can see it didn't take long, and I can now close and see the messages in my postcast server. So here are the 8 outgoing email messages in my SMTP server, and I can see that they have dynamic subject lines. If I open any one of them, for example, the one for helmets, I can see dynamic content reflected everywhere, including the file attachment. Of course, Visual CUT supports all the export formats that are available in Crystal, and in addition, it can do even things that Crystal alone cannot do. In ODBC export, Visual CUT allows you to specify that the export should be appended or replace data in existing tables. This is something that Crystal alone cannot do. I can also, just as one final demonstration here, I can elect to export to HTML, and I'm going to change the file extensions here from PDF to HTML just to reflect that. And if I completely remove the content in the message body, Visual CUT sees that and says, aha, I need to probably embed the HTML export in the email message. So if I start the process here, what we should be able to see inside the message body itself is the full report for that product type, including the chart. So let me switch over to Postcast Server. Here it is. In a few seconds, I should see the messages as they're received. And now I can open up one of these reports, one of these emails, for example, for Mountain. And here it is. I have the full report for Mountain embedded inside the message body, including the chart. Let's turn our attention to how you schedule things to run automatically in Visual CUT. You can call processing in Visual CUT through a command line, and this is the structure of that command line. It starts with the path to the Visual CUT executable, -e, which stands for please execute, and then the path to the report that you want to process. And because the report has saved settings, Visual CUT knows what to do about it. If it's a lowercase e, then Visual CUT would abort the processing for the report if it finds 0 records after it retrieves data for the report. So that opens up a whole world of management by exception, or some tools call it business activity monitoring. You can create reports with record selection criteria that restrict the report to show only exceptions. And then you can run the report fairly frequently, every day, every hour if you wish. And only when exceptions are found, only then the report gets processed. And you can export it, you can email it, you can, if you want, just email it. For example, you can turn off all the export options and embed the necessary information, such as here's an order that is late by more than n days, or here's a product that has inventory that's too high or too low, or here's an accounts receivable record that is getting to be more than 120 days, and only then the manager receives that notification. So, as I said, you can take this command line and call it from anything you wish. The typical approach is to embed it inside a batch file, and because of that, you have this convenience button that allows you to create a batch file. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to specify a name for the batch file called demo1, let's say. And you can see I have a bunch of other batch files. For example, I can bunch together a bunch of command lines inside a single batch file, for example, the end of month reports, where I have 12 different reports that I run at the end of each month. And because I scheduled that batch file in the Windows Task Scheduler, those 12 reports will be processed one after the other at midnight or whenever I schedule that batch file to run. If I click the Open button, Visual CUT tells me that the command line was added to this new batch file and asks me if I want to see it inside Notepad. I'm going to say yes. And there it is. It just copied and pasted that command line for me into the batch file. If I select an existing batch file, it will append it into that existing batch file. The user manual for Visual CUT has a 3-page table that gives you all sorts of optional command line arguments that can invoke various other aspects, such as password protecting PDF files and adding tables of content and merging PDF files and doing all sorts of other things with Excel and other options. So I'm going to leave that for you to see in the user manual. But all you need in order to trigger processing for a report is simply call this command line. So I'm going to save that and show you how you schedule that batch file in the Windows Task Scheduler. Here's how you would schedule the batch file to run every Monday morning using the Vista's Task Scheduler. The user manual provides instructions and screenshots for Windows XP. Go to System and Maintenance, scroll down to Administrative Tools, and click on Schedule Tasks. Click on the Create Task option, and enter a name. I'm going to specify that I want to run this task even when the user is not logged in. Under Triggers, I'm going to add a trigger, and in our case, it's simply going to be a timed trigger. We're going to do this on a weekly basis on Monday in the morning at 7 o'clock. The action is going to be to run a program. In our case, the program is simply our batch file. I don't need any optional arguments. And under Conditions, I'm going to specify that I want to wake up the computer to run this task if it's asleep. And under settings, I'm going to specify that I want to run the task as soon as possible after a scheduled start is missed. For example, maybe the computer has been turned off. I'm going to click OK. Specify my password. And that's it. Now I have the Monday reports task added to the list of tasks. I can run it manually right now, and in that case the batch file is going to run and the report is going to process. Or I can just let it wait until it's time for it to run.